Cynthia Swanson, welcome to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's nice to see you, Mark.
Great to see you. And what an awesome project you've been involved with for the last 18 or so months, maybe a little bit longer than that. And we are right on the eve of the launch of Denver Noir, which is it's a series, part of a series I've been actually following for a long time. Folks who don't know, it's a series published by Akashic Books that features different cities and locations around the world even, and just asks local writers to write a short story in the noir kind of vein. But let's start at the beginning. How did you get involved as editor of Denver Noir, Cynthia?
So Akashic actually recognized that they didn't have, as you said, this has long been around. The series has been around for over 20 years or close to 20 years. They started in Brooklyn. They're Brooklyn based, and they built it up. And now there's over 100 volumes in the series. So it's really extensive. And they recognized that they were missing Denver, and that it was kind of a big piece that was missing, because we're a pretty major city, literary wise and mystery wise. So they were really soliciting. They were looking for an editor, and my name came up as a possibility. So they got in touch with me and asked if I wanted to do it. And unlike you, I didn't know anything about the series. So the first thing I did was get in touch with my agent and say, is this legit? What is this? And she said, yeah, it's amazing. It's awesome. You should, if you want to do it and you've got the time and you're interested, you should definitely do it. So we had a few conversations back and forth, the Akashic folks and I did. And the way that they ask you to begin as the editor is they say, okay, put together a list for us of 14 authors that you would like to see in this collection, that you think you could get, that are local or have local connections to the city. And they wanted a mix of people. So I had to put together, they wanted a mix, first of all, of some that were more genre related, more kind of mystery thriller writers in the genre vein, and then some that were a little bit more literary. So they wanted that. And then they also wanted people from different backgrounds, people at different levels of their writing career, some that were emerging, getting started, some that were established. So they wanted to have some variety in there. So I spent some time putting together that list, which was a pretty interesting experience to do, because some of them I knew, like off the top of my head, I could just come up with a number of people that I thought would be great. But then I started to really kind of dive deep into it and think about, okay, am I really being balanced here? And with all of those requirements that they were asking for, and where I'm not, who could I ask? Who might know somebody that I don't know? So that's what I ended up doing. And I put together that list of 14 authors and gave them extensive information about everybody. And they took a look at that and they said, that looks great. Let's go ahead and sign a contract if you want to and get going with this. And so that's what we did. And that was in October 2020 was when that happened.
That's great. Wow. Well, one thing I just learned is how to pronounce Akashic, because I assume, but so that's great. I stand corrected on that front. That's how much.
It took me a while too. So.
Okay. Yeah. It is an amazing series for the folks who don't know. I've been reading them for not all of them. And if you did decide to dive in, you're going to be busy for years, because it's amazing. And some amazing editors, Joyce Carol Oates and Pete Hamill, and right on down the line. Some
Dennis
really
Lehane did Boston, and Laura Lippman did Baltimore. Tayari Jones did Atlanta. I mean, there's so many cool people that have been involved in the series.
Yeah. How much is your background writing wise involves either short stories and or noir?
Well, what's great about the series is that Akashic has a pretty broad definition of noir. It's not just detective stories or straight up mystery whodunits. It's the way that they define it for the series is, and I love this, it's really just a quick short way of saying it. They say dark and morally ambiguous. And I love both of those things as a writer and as a reader. So I think that my writing, maybe not as much in my first novel, The Bookseller, but definitely in The Glass Forest, my second novel, which is somewhere in between thriller and literary. but definitely has that level of darkness and moral ambiguity. So it was right up my alley to do that kind of work. As for short story writing, I hadn't written a short story in a really long time, honestly. I published a lot of short stories early in my career before my novels were published, but it's been a long time since I had written one. I love reading them. I've always loved reading them. So it was fun to dive back into that, both as the editor and also as an author, because I did contribute a story of my own to the collection too.
And is that a requirement of being the editor that you also draft a story that's going to be in the volume? Is that something that was in your contract?
No, it's not a requirement. They like you to do it if you want to, but only if you want to. There are editors who have chosen not to. Most of them, it seems like, tend to do it. But there are certainly editors who have chosen not to do it for whatever reason, time constraints or whatever else they had going on.
Right. The other interesting step in the process with Denver Noir and with all the series is that they want geographical coverage as well, that you can't just have 14 stories all set in downtown Denver in the darkest alley. You've got to spread out. So how did you go about that?
Yeah, that was interesting. And they asked for that in the proposal. They said, when you give us these names and information about these 14 authors, 13 plus yourself, take your best guess of what neighborhood you think they might do. So I did that, and because they wanted to sort of see that geographic spread. So I kind of just, knowing what I knew about the authors and the ones that I didn't know as well, I kind of had to do a little bit of research and find out where I stalked some of them, like, where do they live? Scary what you can find out on the internet. Or where I'd seen them set other works of fiction. So, in neighborhoods that I knew they might be familiar with or interested in writing about. So I did that and kind of took my best guess. Denver has over 60 recognized neighborhoods. So obviously with 14 stories, we weren't going to cover all of them, but I did want to make sure we hit some of the major ones and some of the more well-known ones, and then some that maybe people didn't know quite as well. So, and kind of have that geographic spread so that we were everywhere. And then once I did start reaching out to the authors and asking them, I asked them what neighborhood would you like to do? And in some of those cases, I was pretty close to what they said. And in some of them, they surprised me and they came back with something completely different that I wasn't expecting them to say.
And was it your decision or Akashic's to say geographically it's got to be within the city and county of Denver? Could you have gone to Metro Denver?
Yeah, a little bit I did. In fact, that came up with, I think maybe you. Asking the question of, could the stories be set in a suburb? Did it have to be right in the city, or could it be in the metro? And they said, as long as it's pretty close to within the city and it's a pretty well recognized suburb. So we actually have Aurora, Lakewood, and Glendale are all in the volume. So all of those are border right on Denver. And I mean, I don't think they would have wanted me to go to like Castle Rock or somewhere like that. But kind of going somewhere that borders on the city was fine. Yeah.
Well, in the case of Glendale, which I happen to have some familiarity with, it's completely surrounded by Denver. So
exactly. Yeah.
Weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was the process from there? How, well, first of all, did any of the authors you approached take a pass?
I had two that took a pass. And both of them, it was just because of time constraints. So then I had to find two more to replace them. And then actually, as we got further into the process, two that had originally said yes ended up having to back out, which was unfortunate. But then I had to find two more for them. So out of the original group that I proposed, there are 10 of us that are in the volume, and then 4 others that came on board later on.
And then the next thing is, as editor, you establish, I assume with Akashic's help, you built some sort of production timeline or editing schedule when you wanted things to start showing up in your inbox and start evaluating what you were seeing. So talk a little bit about that process. And was it smooth? Did you were you pleased with what you saw in the first drafts? How much back and forth was there? All that kind of good stuff.
Well, Akashic gave me a great tip about that. They gave me a deadline, which was June 1st of 2021. To have a completed manuscript ready to go, ready to submit to them with all the stories in it, all edited and in the order that I proposed for the volume. And then they gave me the tip. They said, stagger your deadlines, because then you're not trying to do everything all at once. And they also said you will find that the more established writers probably need a little more time, just because they're usually busier, and while they're happy to contribute and be part of the volume, they just don't have the time. And the emerging writers tend to be a little more eager and ready to jump on it. So, and that did turn out to be true. But everybody pretty much hit their deadlines, and anybody that didn't let me know in plenty of time that they couldn't. So it all worked out just fine. I didn't have, even with having to replace a couple in spring 2021, we were, and I did tell those people it's going to be a pretty tight timeline. I really can only give you about, I think, 2 months was what those folks had, and they were able to pull that together, which was great.
And what did you? Well, it must have been really interesting to kind of and fun to open all these packages and see the variety of voices, the variety of ideas. It must have been kind of interesting. I would assume.
It was totally fun. I mean, it was like Christmas morning a couple different times, doing, a new story's in my inbox. And it was great to read them and read those first drafts. And every time I got one, they all came as Word documents, obviously. And I intentionally did not edit or take any notes or do anything. I just read it straight through once. I might have had some things in my head, but I wasn't going to start marking people's stuff up, even if I saw typos, even if I saw anything. I was just like, I just want to read it once. So I did that for everybody's story. That was my first edit pass with everything, was just to read it once and get the overall impression of the whole story. And then I went back on a second read through and edited, and I did both, macro edits and micro if I saw them, but it was mostly macro. If it was something where I really felt, there was nobody that like totally needed restructuring of the whole story, but there were definitely, everybody had some pieces where I had to kind of say, I'm not quite sure this is working the way that it is, have you thought about this or that you could do instead? And as I saw typos or small edits, I did them just because Akashic asked me to do that. It just makes the job a little easier on their copy editor. But I did tell all the authors, if you don't agree, just reject it. You can just reject that change and we'll let the copy editor make the decision. So so it was several passes. So I did that pass, and then I usually went through it one more time just to make sure, and then sent it back to the author. And then it was with everybody, I had some back and forth. I don't think there was anybody who I submitted my edits and then they accepted everything and that was it. Usually we did a couple back and forths to get it where they were happy with it and it was ready to go.
That's great. And you point out, I mean, once you pull all the stories together and ship it off to the publisher, that was not a done deal at that point. They had to then at some point officially accept your book.
Right. Well, and they did want some rearranging of the order of stories, and even the order of the book is separated into 3 parts, and they wanted them in a slightly different order than it was. And so we had to do some rearranging to get it where they were happy with how I had it laid out.
Yeah, those are 3. I don't have the book handy. Do you have it handy? The 3 different sections.
Of course I do.
Yeah.
So
tell us the 3 sections, and while you've got it open, why don't you just run down the list of writers?
Sure. Okay.
Just so we get it on the record.
Yep, I will do that. I will open, first of all, this is all backwards, but you can see it. There's the handy dandy map of Denver, and every one of those, you can't really put it a little closer, but those are little bodies, dead bodies, and there's a dead body marked at every spot where there's a story. So they put those maps in the beginning of every volume in this series. So we have part 1 is the longest, wickedest street, which if you're familiar with Denver at all, you'll know that means Colfax.
Yep.
And that was something that just came together as I was reading the stories. I realized that we had a good number of stories that were set either on or close to Colfax. And I mean, Colfax is so iconic, if you know the city, that it made sense to have that section. So in that section, we have Colfax and Havana is the first story, and that's by David Heskewanblue-Wyden. Then we have A Life of Little Consequence, which is by Twana Latrice Hill. And then we have my story, which is called Pieces of Everyone Everywhere.
Such a great title.
Thank you. And then the final story in that section is called Tough Girls, and that's by Erica T. Worth. And then the second section I called 5280, which is, as we know from the Mile High, that's the Mile High City. And in that section, that starts with a story called The Lake, which is by Peter Heller. And then we have A Baker's Duckling, which is by R. Allen Brooks. Then
graphic,
which is a story that's told in pictures.
Yep.
Allen is a graphic storyteller, and that was some, actually, we can talk a little bit more about Allen's story too, and the decision to add a graphic story in there. That was a lot of fun. The third story in there is No Gods by Amy Dreyer. And the fourth story is Junk Feed by a guy named Mark Stevens.
I've heard of him.
Heard of him, yeah, it's vaguely familiar.
Yeah.
And then the final story in that section is called Northside Nocturne, and that's by Manuel Ramos. Part 3 is Things to Do in Denver When You're Young. Little takeoff on the When You're Dead, which we all know. The first story in that section is called Ways of Escape, and that's by Barbara Nicholas. Then we have Sangre, which is by D.L. Cordero. We have Dreaming of Ella by Francilia Belton. On Grasmere Lake by Mathanji Submaranian. And the volume ends with El Armero by Mario Acevedo. That's everybody.
Very good. Yeah, very good. Let's talk briefly about the graphic decision there. And it is just great when you open it up to kind of flip through it to see that pop out. It's kind of fun. Was that something you had to get permission to do, or how did that go?
I did. I had Alan on my initial list, and when I sent the proposal to them, I kind of made notes of that. I said, that Alan is a graphic storyteller, and I'd like to include that. I wasn't sure if they'd done that in the past before, and as it turned out, they have. There's a couple other volumes that have graphic stories, and I think Portland does, and maybe St. Louis. So they had done it in the past, and they were certainly open to it. And Alan was a great fit for that. He does a comic called What I Miss that's in the Colorado Sun. So, and he has a couple of books out too of stories. And he's around. He teaches at Regis and also at Lighthouse. So he's definitely around the scene and teaches graphic storytelling. He's fantastic. So that was fun. And actually, he was the first one to get a story to me, because it takes a long time with that. He doesn't always do his own drawing, but he did for this story. And so he wanted to start with a script. So this was all new to me. I didn't know how to do this, but so he started by submitting a script to me, and we went back and forth on that script. And then he gave me some thumbnails, just sort of real basic of what the panels would look like. And then once we were good with both of those two pieces, then he actually drew the actual panels. So it was a fun process to do that with him. He was great to work with. That's great.
And let's talk about your story. When did you start writing that? And was it something that just sort of the idea, how did the idea come to you? Did you claim a certain neighborhood ahead of time just so nobody else would touch it?
I did, yeah. So my story, Pieces of Everyone Everywhere, is set in Cheeseman Park. And I knew I wanted to write about that when I knew I was going to do this volume, and when I decided to include a story. Part of the reason is I knew about it. If you don't know the history of Cheeseman, it's a lovely bucolic park in the middle of Denver, just west or east of Capitol Hill. But when Denver was just getting started as a city, sprouting up in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, it was a cemetery. And as the city spread east, and a lot of mansions were cropping up around there, people did not want to be looking down on a cemetery. So the city decided to build a park. And when they did that, they told people, they put out notices. They're like, look, if you've got family buried there, get them out of there. You got to exhume those and move them somewhere else. So a lot of people did. And then the bodies that were left were just left there. So the city hired an undertaker to exhume all the bodies. And I knew about that pretty creepy history of Cheeseman, and I thought, well, that would be a really fun story to tell. And who better to tell it than one of the laborers who was doing this work. So that's who I have as my main character in the story. It was very fun to write. I definitely enjoyed putting that story together.
Yeah. And it's set when? It's not contemporary, right?
No, it's set in 1893, which is when that happened. And that's historically accurate. That is when that happened. And so I looked up a lot of information on it. I was actually researching that for my novel in progress because Cheeseman is mentioned in the book, and not to the extent that it is in the story, but that sort of weird history is in there. And my novel is not set back then. It's set in it's dual timeline, 1979 and 2004, but the characters are they live around there and they're interested in that history too. So I knew about it, and I already kind of was, thinking of writing about it, or at least, having it mentioned briefly in the novel. And so writing that story just kind of a good fit and getting deeper into the research on it. So that's what I did.
Definitely want to ask you about your work in progress in a few minutes.
Sure.
Who edited your story?
My agent edited it, and a good friend of mine named Jennifer Kinchlow, who I think you know, she writes the Anna Blanc mysteries.
Yep.
And so she writes historical mystery, and I thought she would be very good as a reader for the story. Yep. And so she read it. She gave me some great comments on it, and my agent gave me some good comments on it.
That's great. So
between the two of them, I felt like I had a pretty good edit on it.
Yeah, excellent. So, Cynthia, I'm wondering, looking back from the day you first got that query to run this show, to put this all together, what do you think you learned, gained, anything just from going through the process that is impacting, how you write today, if at all, maybe not? And I guess the companion piece of that is, are you glad you did it?
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot. You learn a lot during this process. First of all, it's a lot of work. And I knew it would be. I definitely knew it would be, and I was ready to do that, and that's fine. But it and all of it was really fun work, so I was okay with that. It's interesting because I think it's okay to announce this now because it's actually in Denver Noir, but one of the authors in Denver Noir, David Heska Wong-Bui-Wyden, is the editor of a forthcoming volume that's going to be called Native Noir, and that's coming up soon. So he and that sprung out of him being one of the authors in this book and talking to Akashic about wanting to have that volume, and they ended up approving that. But anyway, he called me and said that when he was starting to propose that and talk about that with Akashic, and he's like, "So what's it like?" I said, "It's a lot of time." Yeah. Make sure you have some time put aside. So, but that was one piece, and then it also made me realize, I feel like I know a lot of writers and a lot of people in the Denver writing community, but it stretched me a little bit. And I got to know some people that I didn't know, and who I'm grateful for. And that's been a really rewarding part of it. And I'm really looking forward to the events, which we have coming. We've got events through May and June, and all 14 authors are presenting at least one event, most of them too. And so that's going to be a lot of fun, just to spend some time on the stage with everybody. So those two pieces. And then as far as my own writing, I think anytime that you're reading anybody else's writing, it always affects your own writing. And you can always learn the things that are inspirational that people do. I mean, I just look at how tight some of these writers write. I mean, like Peter Heller, oh my goodness. Like, I mean, the way that he can write and the mood that he can set with just a few words. I just, I was blown away when I read that story. His story was one of the shortest in the entire collection, but
and one of the darkest.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I found that really inspirational.
Yeah.
So,
and it's an innocent sort of darkness that just, I just loved it. It came out of nowhere.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Which is what you want. Yeah.
Right.
That's great. So while you touched on marketing, so let's just quickly, kind of establish a couple of the key events coming up. I know I'll happen to be there. I'll be there next week, Tuesday, May 3rd.
Yep.
For the launch, is that the actual launch event?
That's the actual launch. That's publication day, and that's launch. Yep. It will be at the Tattered Cover Colfax. So we're looking forward to that. And that will be you and me and Dave Wyden and Alan Brooks. So people that we've already talked about today will be on the stage for that one. And I think a lot of the other authors will be there too, on hand to sign books. So I think everybody kind of wants to be around to help celebrate that one.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then you've got various, I know there's a website, but you can go check out various bookstores, libraries, lots of events, as you say, through May and through June. That's great. Yep. Fantastic. Well, let's talk a little bit about what's happening with Cynthia Swanson's books. The bookseller came out what year?
2015.
And The Glass Forest came out.
Glass Forest came out in 2018. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
both did extremely well.
Thank you.
Bestseller lists. And
Mhm.
the movie option is still out there with the
Movie
bookseller.
option is still out there. They just keep renewing it. So yeah, the movie option is with Julia Roberts production company. So we'll see. I mean, that would be lovely if it happens, and they haven't let it go. I thought with pandemic that they'd be like, yeah, we can dump this one, and didn't. They renewed it actually twice during that time. So we'll see. You know, I keep my fingers crossed that it will still happen. So yeah, that's still out there.
Yeah.
Who knows? So
And
yeah.
what are you working on now?
So the book that I have now, I'm just finishing up and getting off to my agent, and hopefully we will get that one out there in the world to be seen sometime soon. I don't really talk a whole lot about it since I don't like to jinx things when they're at this stage, but as I said, it is dual timeline. It's set in Denver, and it's dual timeline, single narrator. And so we're going to learn a little bit about this person and a little bit about 1970s Denver, and a little bit about early 2000s Denver. So that's about all that I'm going to say right now. But it's been a wonderful project to work on, and I'm really happy with it. And I think my agent is pretty happy with it too. So fingers crossed. We'll see what I'm in between publishers. My publisher for The Glass Forest was Touchstone at Simon & Schuster, and unfortunately they folded shortly after the paperback came out of Glass Forest. So I no longer have a publisher. So we can take this one, which is a little bit of a freedom. You can kind of take that out and see who picks it up. So we'll see I don't know where I'm going to end up next. We'll find out. So somewhere, I hope.
So when you look back at the bookseller and The Glass Forest, can you connect the work in progress thematically or in terms of tone or style? What do you see?
I would say that it is darker than the bookseller, but not quite as dark as The Glass Forest. It's somewhere in between in tone. It's got it, and it again. I think I had said earlier. It's set partly in 1979 and partly in the early 2000s in Denver. So it's dual timeline between those two times. And one of the main characters in the 1979 timeline owns a record store on Colfax. So if you like old 70s music, that gets mentioned a lot in the story. So, and then yeah, it definitely leads into a little bit of darkness. I will, without giving away too much, I will say there are knives involved. So you will be plan to read about knives. I know that doesn't sound like it has anything to do with somebody owning a record store, but trust me, it all comes together. So we'll see.
Did the darkness get darker editing Denver Noir, or would that pre-exist prior to that whole project?
I think it pre-existed, but it probably got a little bit darker as I was going through it, for sure. This book is, which I don't usually do, but this one I actually plotted completely. So although I'd written some earlier drafts of it that were not plotted, that I completely was winging it, but then I really realized I needed to step back and rewrite it and have a whole full plot before I did it. So that did give me a little bit of freedom with the writing itself, with the tone, and to really work with that once, because I wasn't trying to figure out plot at the same time. Actually, it was an inspirational thing to do. And I've never been a particularly good plotter and much more of a pantser, but I think I'm going to try from here on out to plot a little bit more.
Oh, if you were giving lessons to the pantsers out there, I have no idea how you plot. I just don't.
I don't know either, but I'd like to be faster. So, and I know that all the people that write a little bit faster, they tend to plot. So even if you just did a little bit of it, maybe that would help. I don't know. We'll find out.
Yeah.
So that's down the line.
Yeah. I don't want to drag anything out of you. You don't want to share, but are you sharing a working title for this one?
I never share working titles. And one of the reasons I'll tell you that is because both of my books ended up with completely different titles than their working titles. So I figured they're never worth putting out there because it's probably not what the book's going to get called anyway. So
yeah. What were the working titles? Can you go in retrospect and
sure?
See,
yeah.
What?
Yeah. So for the bookseller, when I submitted it to my agent, when I got my agent, it was called "What If We Had Never Met," and she didn't like that title. So when we took it out on submission, we went out with the title "Life at This Moment," which is a Catherine Ann Porter quote that's at the beginning of the book. And my editor at Harper, who picked up that book, loved the book, and loved the quote, but didn't like the title. And so she was the one who wanted the bookseller. So that's what we ended up using.
What did you think of that title? What did you think of the
I was fine
bookseller?
with it. And it was really, I think, mostly a marketing decision. They wanted it. The book was about a bookseller, and that's such a great sell to everybody, to readers and librarians and bookstores and everybody. So she said, I don't know why we're not just saying this outright. So, and I was a debut author. I didn't know anything. I was like, okay, that's fine. I don't care. Think it's going to sell books. Okay, whatever. And it probably did. She was probably right about that. So, I was completely fine with it that she wanted to do that. And then with the Glass Forest, it was when I took it out, when we got that one, and that one went to Touchstone at Simon & Schuster. The title that they bought that with was The Other Forests. And it's funny because I used that title for a long time, but I never said it out loud. And Forest had 2 R's. It was the name of the family. And I never said it out loud, but once I started saying it out loud, I was like, wow, that's a little bit lispy. And so when they said they didn't like it and they wanted to change it, I wasn't sad. And it was actually someone at Touchstone who came up with the title The Glass Forest. And I said, well, can I change the name of the family then to Glass? Could we just have them be the glasses? And then that worked on all kinds of metaphorical levels.
Yeah.
And, they love that. So that's what
That's great. Wow.
So that's how things evolve. It never is what you think it's going to be, which is why it's always weird to talk about a book that's in the process of, in the point that I'm at right now. I feel like I've said more than I normally would even say about it. So you guys know more. Everybody who's listening knows more than anybody.
That's what we're here on the podcast. Where we want the inside scoop.
Exactly. You're getting it.
Yeah. Well, in the case of Denver Noir, obviously no big title struggle there. So it was a slam dunk from the get-go. So
yeah. There was no worrying about the title with that one. So not worrying about a lot of things with that one. I have to say, one of the great things about doing that volume is I didn't experience all of the up and down anxiety that you do when you have your own book out. And because I certainly feel responsible for it, and I kind of feel like it's my baby, but I also feel like it was a much more collective experience between all of those authors and all of the hard work that they put into it, and all of the wonderful work that they've all been doing, promoting it and sharing it on social media and talking about it and talking it up. And then all the work that Akashic has been doing. And they're a fantastic publisher, and I really have enjoyed working with them. I just love them. They've been great.
Yeah. And speaking of music, it's started by a former musician, right? A rock and roller.
Yeah, Johnny Temple. Yep.
Johnny, have you had a chance to meet him?
Yeah. No, actually, I didn't meet him, but I was actually in Brooklyn a couple of weeks ago. I was taking my high school senior on a couple of last college visits before he makes his decision. And I was there, and I was supposed to meet Johnny, but the day that I was going to go, his son got COVID at school the day before. So Johnny took a COVID test and it was negative, but he decided not to come to work. But I did meet the other members of the team. I did still go to Akashic, and I met the other members of the team, and they're great. It was a lot of fun to go there. They're just, they have their work in this old warehouse in Brooklyn, and that's been, made over into offices. And it was a fun experience to hang out with them.
What a blast. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up, Cynthia, and I gave you 0 advance warning on this, none. But our final question on the podcast is always asking our guests to recommend one book you read recently, a writer you think more people should be paying attention to, something that just has really captivated your interest. It doesn't have to be the all-time best book ever, but just to share it and pay it forward a little bit. So anything come to mind?
I'll tell you the one I'm reading right now, and I'm not done with it yet, but it is, and I wish I had it sitting here. It's in another room in my house, but it's called Tell Me Everything, and it's by Erica Krause, who is a Colorado author. It's a memoir, and it is about her experience working as a private investigator and investigating a sexual assault case. And it is, you can't put it down. It's just chilling. And amazingly well written. And I know she spent a lot of time and a lot of that's a hard thing to do, to write about something like that. Very, very brave and incredibly well written. So check out Tell Me Everything by Erica Krause. It's great.
I've seen nothing but raves online about that one. So yep, great. Well, Cynthia, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast today and I will see you next week in Book Bar, not
Can't
Book Bar,
wait.
Tattered
Cover.
Cover in Denver, and on Tuesday night the 3rd. And best of luck with Denver Noir and all your projects.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been great to be here. Thank you so much, Mark. We'll see you soon.